So I'm going to start off by aging myself and acknowledging that I'm very technologically challenged. If I didn't have this great team helping me today, I would have already fumbled. Okay, so what you saw me doing with my eyes cast down is I just learned how to operate a clock. And why am I so obsessed about that this morning is because I've been told that I should speak only for 45 minutes and also allow about 15 to 20 minutes for questions. And my fear is that I'm going to run over time and I will not honor my commitment to keep it to 45 minutes. So this is also a way for me to offer a few disclaimers before I get into some very serious topics. Yeah? One of the disclaimers is that I will barely be scratching the surface of some of the topics that have been hinted at, but we haven't really discussed here, right? And I might refer to the excellent ideas that were shared with us by the presenters in the last 2 days. I mean, I'm going away from here learning so much more and anchoring my own approach to this very serious topic based on the work of colleagues like Sandy and Aruna and the comments made by Dr. Seshadri. And so you'll see, and I hope that you, along with me, will recognize that those same threads are weaving through everything that I'm talking about as well. Having said that, when Sandy and I were planning this keynote, I was saying that I don't want to be redundant because we are all constrained for time. And so I won't touch on certain areas, for example, risk factors. We all know what those are. But there are some others that the other speakers kind of glossed over, saying we don't need to know this right now. I will come back to those from a more strategic standpoint, yeah? So for me, this is really like life coming full circle, yeah? It's 32 years of doing this work, but what I want to say is that my journey started where many of you are starting your journey. And what do I mean by that? That when I was first introduced to the possibility of working on suicide prevention, I took it on as a graduate assistant position because I was already a clinician when I went back for my doctorate. So I had 2 master's degrees already. I was getting my 3rd. I was doing an internship in that. They said, you've got clinical training. We have this new suicide prevention program starting at our university, which was University of Illinois, Chicago. It was very big, but its claim to fame is that University of Illinois started the very first child psychiatry clinic in the US, the Institute for Juvenile Research. And I trained there and have the privilege of saying that some of the people that Irina was quoting yesterday in the workshop, I actually trained with them because Dick Schwartz, who is the founder of Internal Family Systems, was a faculty at IJR when I was there. So we go back a long time. So, as long as it was a project where I was in a professional capacity and we were training high schools, we were mandated by, believe it or not, Ronald McDonald Children's Charities, McDonald's Hamburgers, to go into every school in 3 counties and train the staff on suicide prevention. And it was a gatekeeper model that actually preceded or was contemporaneous with QPR, which many people know here. So it was fine. I was a good trainer. I was a good speaker. It was not personally connected with me, so I designed a training. We delivered it. But then my mentor, who was a PI on that grant, said to me, Aruna, when I was doing my PhD, I came across a lot of Asian suicides, and particularly South Asian suicides. You should study suicide in Asian Americans because nobody's doing it. And take me literally at that time, nobody was touching it. And I want to bring that back into my narrative. And my answer to her was, I won't touch it with a 9-foot pole. I'm a mental health clinician. I'll do my doctorate on some easy topic like mental illness, something. She says, no, 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 you should do it. I said, not me. Then there was a suicide that happened. And the youth that died was part of a very large Jain congregation. And and that congregation had many, many, many medical professionals in it, particularly doctors. But the youth who were his peers had to go to their parents and say, can none of you help us? That young man was a freshman at a Midwestern university and died on campus. So through connections, a friend of mine said, Aruna, I know that this is what you're studying. Can you come to our Jain temple? It's a huge temple. That was my first postvention. And I learned it by the seat of my pants. I literally went to all the clinicians and said, what am I supposed to do? You know? But that experience was really sobering for me. It was a wake-up call. It's like, what's going on in my community? We have the talent, we have the resource, but we don't seem to have the will. Even then, I was a little bit reluctant. But by the time my dissertation was coming around, we had 3 suicides at UIC. 2 of them were Indian students. One happened to be a freshman who went to the same very small school for gifted kids that my daughter went to. The entire population of the school was 300 students, so you can imagine we knew every student. The second student was a graduate student from South India who hung himself in the lobby of the Honors College. The Honors College building was a secluded, small building. So both the suicides happened in the vicinity of the Honors College. Clearly, the Honors College community was also small. They were all the brightest students. And they were very impacted by it, were struggling, didn't know what to do. So then I'd gone to the director of the counseling center and I said, you know, we need to design a project of outreach to students, particularly Asian American students. I learned so much in that 1 year that I tried to do this work. And I'm bringing this in because we are all sort of zeroing in on youth suicide, you know. So the first focus group, or I presented it not as a debrief, because students didn't want to talk about it. I said, we are doing a focus group to figure out, you know, what your ideas are. All the faculty of the Honors College showed up. And clinicians will understand what I say. It became like a fishbowl. All the faculty looking in, yeah? So, guess what happened? Nobody spoke. Nobody spoke. None of the students opened their mouth. So then I had to go to the faculty and say, please do not come to these focus groups. Let me manage them on my own. This was a replication of what happened in the Jain temple, because all the parents came there. And I had to say to them, please don't come into the auditorium. There were almost 60 young people sitting there, including the brother and sister of the young man who had died, you know? So our youth have very specific needs, but we need to sort of be in tune, and the word attuned was used all the time, in how we sort of go about approaching our conversations with young people. My talk is not only about young people, but I hope that I'll share some theoretical concepts that might help us all springboard into more strategic planning and kind of action steps as we move forward. But it was a very difficult time, and another takeaway from that project, I actually thought I would get more mileage calling a spade a spade. And I said, this is suicide prevention in Asian Americans, you know? And the Asian students came to me and said, why is it about Asian Americans? And the white students are saying, why is it only about the Asian Americans? So then I understood that there is something that is universal about the youth experience, and I started calling it creating community at UIC. It's serendipitous because I'm talking about 2000, and it was 2007, 2008 that connecting came together, and we started. So a lot of the ideas that I was sharing with them, I had already learned on the ground, And in 2005, I'd formed a coalition and we established as a nonprofit called the Asian American Suicide Prevention Initiative, with the logo being for Asians, by Asians. And I know that that was expressed in Raj Mariwala's sentiment there. If we are not in it, then it's not about us, right? So when I would get calls from white people to say, can we come and learn for continuing education because there was nothing happening, or this is an opportunity to get continuing education credits, I would say no. And the no comes from the principle of safety that we've all been talking about. I was gentle with them because I would say, listen, it prompts a voyeuristic experience for a survivor to be observed by people who haven't experienced what you've experienced and are there just to sit and listen. Yeah? So I think creating safety takes many, many different forms. Okay, so on that note, let me move into some more concrete ideas. What am I going to do today? I'm framing, my message is more contemporary, but I'm going to frame it from what I have observed, and I'm taking full ownership. These are my opinions. So if you go to an American and say, we heard Aruna Jha say this, they may or may not agree with what I'm saying. This is my opinion, this is my experience, yeah? So I'm going to describe the evolution of suicide prevention in the US because we are standing on the cusp of a similar time period when the history of official suicide prevention started in the US, right? I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to apply core public health principles to the design of coordinated community-based approaches. And I think public health can teach us a lot about what to do and also what not to do. So the lessons are bifold. Some things we say, all right, this is good for us. We will incorporate it into what we're trying to do in the US. And some, we learn from their mistakes and avoid those pitfalls, yeah? So identify lessons that are applicable to India's prevention landscape. But because we are sitting in Pune, I want to express another bias of mine. When I was doing the work with the Asian American Suicide Prevention Initiative, I used to be very clear to say that I'm working with the Chicago community, at best with the Midwestern community. What I'm learning here and what I'm applying here may or may not apply in New Jersey or Philadelphia or California. You can replicate the process that we are using, but you have to do your own. And that brings me to this point that I have started sharing with the connecting core family, and I hope by the end of today, this whole group will be connecting's core family. That's what will make it worth it. That we have to contextualize and tailor everything that we do, literally everything, to the community we are serving and to the context within which we are trying to operate, yeah? So there are some other lessons like that. Examine the critical role of compassion and communication to enhancing engagement, reducing stigma, and fostering recovery and resilience. I think my message, as I was reflecting on it this morning, got tailored even a little bit more, primarily because I think the core points that were made over the last 2 days, if we can just hang on to those, we have learned quite a lot that we will apply to our addressing of shame and stigma. But the very start of my talk already addressed it, that I'm saying that I embodied stigma. I prevented myself from intervening till such time it actually happened to me, as in somebody came to me for help. Yeah? I have some stories about that too. And hopefully all of this will amount to being a call to action, an action of a specific type. So based on all of this, the title slide didn't have the title of my talk, but it is essentially lessons from 30 years of US experience advancing suicide prevention through compassion, communication, and a public health lens. That's what we're trying to do, but it's a vast topic, and I will not cover all of it, not one bit. So, somebody very, very, very kindly had said to me that my clock will stay on. It's turned off. So I just want to tell you that. Give me a second. So, all right. This is another one of my disclaimers. I teach both graduate and undergraduate classes in clinical practice. And in my graduate courses, one of the courses that I'm teaching is suicide prevention for advanced level clinicians. So they're second-year master's students. And most of the students are non-traditional, so they're coming with many, many years of clinical experience at the bachelor's level. And I like to start my classes with this quote because it's a kind of a disclaimer as well. I'm not here to teach you anything. This is Khalil Gibran. Those of us that share the 70s, you know these quotes. He's one of my favorite poets, along with Rumi and everybody else. So no man can reveal to you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of your knowledge. And that awakening from sleep is what I'm seeing in each and every one of you today. The teacher who walks in the shadow of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. Believe me, I've come here in a spirit of immense faith for the connecting family. And that's all that I'm sharing here with you in all humility. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. For me, that last statement encapsulates everything, which is each one of you is going to take away what fits for you in this moment. Why do I say that? Because what I'm seeing is a range of experiences here. There are many very young students who are just at the start of their journey. They are going to absorb this knowledge from a different mindset. We have incredibly learned members of the audience sitting here, and I've named them. All of you know. And Dr. Seshadri was the director of and dean of NIMHANS. I mean, you cannot surpass that level of knowledge and experience. So my apologies to those who will find some of my ideas redundant. And also apologies to those who get alarmed by some of the things that I say, yeah? And with that, I want to say one more thing. Every talk that I've done, whether it's an auditorium full of people, or sometimes I think it's worth my time to go and talk to a group of 5 people. Regardless, there's always been someone who's had a very close experience with suicide. Either they've lost a loved one to suicide, they've had episodes of suicidality in their own lives, they might be struggling with suicidal ideation right now, and all of the conversations that you've heard today, not today, up till today, and also my talk today, they are definitely going to weigh very heavily on you, and they can activate a lot of your emotions too. I know we've said in passing that there are volunteers who can listen to you, but that's there if you need it. I want to say something else in addition to that, which is the feelings that you're feeling right now are honoring the experiences that you've had, and these feelings will propel you forward as you take on the baton and say, this is the race I want to run. But it might also be that some of you will say, you know what? I got what I wanted from this conference, but I'm not quite ready for it right now. I just want to say that's okay too. That's okay too. Because before we can be compassionate and gentle with anybody else, that's my overriding message of everything, we need to be compassionate and gentle with ourselves. Okay? So, moving on. I want to give us a little bit of a historical perspective, and once again, I know that many of you already know this, But I want to do it from a specific standpoint. And it is, I'm just laying it out, I'm giving the story away, it is to demonstrate to you that the understanding of suicide has shifted. And it's shifting right before our eyes. And we are all part and parcel of that shift. So the earliest records of suicide for the Abrahamic cultures, Christianity particularly, are the medieval times when the religious wars were happening and all the crusaders were going into battle in the name of fighting for Jesus Christ. And the belief was that they would be going to heaven. Yeah? Similarly, around the same era, when the Muslim faith came, the Muslims were doing the same thing. I want to point out that in most religions, suicide is categorized as a sin. But when you study the scholarship around belief systems, what you understand is that the classification of suicide being a sin was actually done as a deterrent to the vast number of people that were actually just jumping into suicide. I'm bringing this up to contrast this with what has happened with the Eastern faiths and Hinduism as well. We are all sitting in India. Our first suicide of record was Sati Parvati. It goes back thousands of years, you know. But if you study the literature and our scriptures, the tenets about suicide are on both sides of the fence. And our biggest challenge is that for the vast majority of us, we've been conditioned to think that suicide is a very legitimate option. Yeah? We've got to be cautious about that. After that, the first written record of suicide really was Durkheim. Well, written record, the Greek mythologies, you know, Iliad, they have the mention of suicides also. So suicide's been around a long time, but we are building into the modern era. So Durkheim in the 1800s described 4 types of suicide. And when I've talked in India in the past, many people have said, oh yeah, we know about Durkheim. But you know, he talks basically he was a sociologist, and he was looking at social factors that elevated the numbers of suicide. And he was talking about things that we've talked about in this conference. The social regulation versus social integration. And when we talk about community, we're talking about social integration. Durkheim that time too said that the more integrated communities would have lower rates of suicide. Now that is actually a questionable finding, and many contemporary researchers are re-looking at Durkheim's work and saying, does this really fit or not? But what I want to say is that when Durkheim talks about egoistic suicide, altruistic suicide, anemic suicide, and fatalistic suicide. He doesn't talk a whole lot, and his descriptions of altruistic suicide are not accurate. Altruism is when you do something for the greater good of other people. I think in our context, altruistic suicide is quite likely when people genuinely believe that the ones that they love and they care about would be better off without them. They're not doing it for themselves, they're doing it for the others, yeah? And the context in which that comes out often is honor and shame and a sense of failure, you know. But fatalistic suicide is what Durkheim described as incredibly oppressive and constraining, restrictive cultures that are rigid, and people believe that they have no options at all. I would say that that also applies to many of the cases of youth suicide that we see here, and many of the cases of other types of suicide also. So just getting familiar with these theories is a good thing. I'm going to talk a little faster. After Durkheim, the first person, and he was mentioned by Sandy in her talk yesterday, if you were in the workshop, is Edwin Schneidman. Schneidman was a clinical psychologist working for the Veterans Administration in Los Angeles. And he got a project to go and review suicide notes. And he reviewed literally hundreds upon hundreds of suicide notes. Not every suicide will leave a note. But based on that, he came up with this idea that we have referenced in our talks, that ultimately it's psychic, it's the pain that is the driver for suicidal thinking. But it's not just pain, and that's what I want to clarify here. It's not just unbearable pain psychologically, but it's also the perturbation that comes, the agitation that comes in the context of that psychological pain. And the pain is often driven by context. It's social factors, it's a social situation. And when the person starts to feel like, oh my God, that is something that we have to pay attention to. But we talked about constricted thought processes. So when the pressure starts to build on your internal pressure cooker, in the combination of unbearable psychological pain and perturbation, there is another factor that we need to look at, and that is the self-hate. And in Irina's talk, the self-hate is the shame that you feel for feeling the way you're feeling. When that self-hate kicks in, the situation starts to go towards hopelessness. And so clinicians are alert to and are monitoring for hopelessness and this level of self-disgust that is emerging in the client. Does this apply to all of us in other situations? I do believe it does. And as we continue our trainings, we should sit down and explore this in greater depth, because you cannot understand it with just 2 sentences that I'm talking, right? But Schneidman was followed by contemporary psychologists and psychiatrists who are coming up with the more contemporary theories of suicide. And it's like Thomas Joyner, he's talking about burdensomness and stuff like that. Klonsky, Craig Bryan, David Jobs, all of these people. No point in talking about these theories, because what I want to highlight, they're worth reading, you should read them, you should understand them, is that they're building on the same basic ideas and trying to add more complex nuances to them. So if you understand this, that it's about psychological pain, it's about crossing the threshold of tolerance, it's about feeling agitated and perturbed and saying, I got to do something, which is kind of pushing the impulsive side. It's leading you from thought to behavior, and then you're measuring for hopelessness. You've got the gist of all of these theories. But now I want to come to the watershed point. All of these theories are created in a very medical context. And there are voices that are emerging from other parts of the world, particularly Europe, that are countering the medical model of suicide. And that is coming from the voices of people with lived experiences. And we are all here with our own lived experiences. And what they're saying is that this medical model is solely dependent on, and we heard the panel say that yesterday too, it's going to do us some harm. I do want to say that because we tend to get a lot of our knowledge from the West and we incorporate it in India, this is my opinion, that we tend to favor the medical model. And the risk is that families think, okay, person's depressed, psychiatrist के पास लेके जाते हैं, वो दवाई देगा, वो ठीक हो जाएगा, right? It's not as simple as that. So, especially in the context of adolescent suicide is when the drive came through, maybe about 20 years ago, where they started realizing that adolescents that were placed on antidepressants were more likely to attempt a suicide, and what was that all about? In my mind, what that is about is that there was no family education that was going along with the prescription of medications. And that, I feel, is an issue even today in the context of what we are talking about, which is whether it's an adolescent or an adult, when their depression and despair is contextualized, when it is because of what's happening in their life, you give them medication. When they're very depressed, they don't have the energy to act on it. Their mind is dulled. They don't know what to do, right? So relatively speaking, physical body-wise, they're safe because they just don't have the energy. You give them an antidepressant, you don't alert the families, pay attention because the risk is actually going up. The person suddenly wakes up from their stupor, the depression stupor, and says, nothing has changed in my life. What's the point of living? And they suddenly have the energy to make the attempt. Yeah? So as community-focused preventionists, if there is one thing we can do, we can start including the psychoeducational component to say, you can't afford to relax. Okay, so basic sum total of this slide is that all of these are shaping our beliefs and our attitudes towards prevention. And we are here today to basically empower ourselves to do more of what we are doing, but to do it correctly, to do it with education. I need to say, can you please check your clock? Because my clock was off. Where am I? How much time do I have? Just 10 minutes. 20 minutes. All right. So the other thing, so I'm not going to go through my whole slide deck. That is very clear. The drive to standardize is the other thing I want to point out that the West is very good about, because they were industrialized long before us, and everything in industrialization is about standardization. There was, there will be an attempt to standardize as well. And the medical model was easier to standardize. Call everybody mentally ill. The pharmaceuticals were funding the research, so what time is that? Actually, 4:50. And so everything became a medical problem. Standardize it. All hospitals were trained the same way. All social welfare agencies were trained the same way. And Aruna talked about it. I am very, very committed to the same idea. Most schools of social work, psychology, even psychiatry, the students are exposed to the standardized risk assessments and safety plans. Even today, it is true. No suicide contracts. Why? Because it was easy. And on a short-term basis, if you were being funded for $5 million, you had to show good outcomes. You showed good outcomes because you were only measuring them short-term. We administered safety plans to 1,000 veterans. Job is done, right? Do they ever look at those safety plans? No. But do you even know what is the word used was the phenomenology of the suicide? And I've actually experienced that because I was a suicide prevention coordinator for the VA. And that's how I transitioned out of academia back into clinical work and back into academia now, right? I saw this firsthand, that if you sat down and talked to the veteran, it happened with me, the story that came out was that they were at imminent risk of attempting a suicide that very weekend. They'd met with the psychiatrist before. I went and spoke to the psychiatrist, and I was told, oh, no, I did a suicide risk assessment. Please stay away from my patient. I said, he's going to attempt this weekend. Yeah, let the community take care of it. They can call the police, right? What happens when we call the police? So that's what it is. Can one size fit all? No. We have to be flexible and open and adapt. My big message is we need to adapt and contextualize. All right, so here's the thing. There are some elements, and probably I'll leave it after talking about the public health approach, which I think we should discuss more as we organize to do suicide prevention, because there's great value to that, and these principles need to be adhered to. So here's what public health is about. It's a 4-phase process that you go through, and you go through it iteratively, okay? So the first phase is you got to quantify, you got to understand what the problem is, and you have to assess it, and you have to quantify it. How big is it? So the example that came to mind for me was that you might have in a women's club, you have one woman who's depressed, you've got another woman who's depressed, but suddenly you start seeing there's 4, 5, 6. Public health would say, try to find out if there are more. Are they sharing the same issues? Are they depressed for the same reason? If that's the case, then don't do it one-on-one, then design a program that will address all of those together. And public health sort of uses a very wide lens and says, let's go statewide, let's go nationwide, right? But I'm saying you can apply the same approach to the smaller scale work that we are doing to our benefit in terms of effectiveness and efficacy of what we are doing. Because how long can we keep working one-on-one with people? We'll run out of resources, right? So we got to go bigger, but we got to do it on the basis of accurate assessment and understanding of what the issue actually is. So then assessment will lead you to identifying the causes why something is happening. From that, you will go to, the key thing is the icon of the target, actually. That you got to design what's called a targeted intervention, not a diffuse intervention. Diffuse interventions are good for what we're doing here, raising awareness and a baseline kind of education of everything. But if it's an acute problem, then design a targeted intervention and test it. Develop and test it. So do a prototype first. If that prototype works, then disseminate it. Disseminate it and implement it. In the dissemination and implementation, my bias has become over the years, because I've been trying to do it in different ways, is that just creating a lecture and delivering it is not going to mobilize people into action. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked for me. It hasn't worked for a lot of the other people who have really high reputable programs. You got to show people how to actually do it. And in the core connecting family that's here will remember this, that when we did the first set of trainings for connecting in 2000, we did a 5-day training, but we followed it with 1 week of lectures where the trainees were invited to follow along and connecting advisory members were allowed to follow along. The key message there was, through experience, to understand that the message has to be tailored to the audience. You cannot talk to the cops with the same standard suicide prevention lecture that you talk to nurses, that you talk to doctors, that you talk to college students, that you talk to parents. You have to, the core principles are the same. Be compassionate, pay attention, attend to the needs of the person. Don't use rude language, don't rebuff them. But it's not as simple as saying that, yeah? And you have to account for their own resistance and their own barriers to receiving that message from you. So this is basically communication theory 101, right? Basic communication. You're the sender, but if there's static and the receiver is not primed, that message doesn't carry through. Plain and simple. I think this is something that all of us can understand and take back home with us. Okay, so a couple of other things. I'm just going to go forward. Sandy said this very well. You all will have access to these slides. So below the surface, there is so much more going on. I want to give you this as a tool, actually. So I'm going to do the next two or three slides also. That another metaphor that's very good is suicide is the canary in the coal mine. The canary in the coal mine in olden days, when coal miners used to go into coal mines, there was a lot of carbon monoxide gas and coal miners would die. So they used to put a canary in a cage down into the coal mine. And if the canary did not sing, they knew that they should not go down there. So for us, rather than the tip of the iceberg, it is that in our country, the student suicides are the canaries. There is something very toxic going on in our society, and it's that toxicity that needs to be cleared out and dissipated, and the panelists talked a lot about it. So I'm just giving you basically different words to explain what's already been discussed here, and I want to respect what's been said. So numbers speak very, very loud. I want to just highlight, and this is, I'm doing it in contrast to what another panelist said, that numbers don't matter. Numbers matter. Numbers matter a lot. So when you have access to these slides, you will see that I used US numbers, because they gather data more strictly, right? To explain if we use the same ratios in India, and we're using those ratios just to illustrate, because we are not gathering data very well. What is the actual scope of the problem that we're talking about? So that's one more concept I want to share with all of you. So this is the burden of injury model that is used in public health. 5 minutes? Yeah. In the US, it is for each death, there is a certain number of unaccounted for events that also need to be gathered. And the policy advocates were talking about that, but here's what you know if you actually have numbers. These are 2018 numbers, and I want to also highlight that look at the topmost number of deaths in the US, 46,518. And then I will contrast it with the Indian numbers. By the time you come down with those 46,500, you come down to 10 million people of unreported events of various types. That is the actual scope of the problem. So if you use those same ratios, and just for people who will go back and examine these slides, the ratios are in parentheses. If you apply them to 171,000 suicides, that is official in India for 2022, we're talking about 40 million people as a catchment of mental health for that year alone. Now, I do want to take a few minutes to move into the next slide and highlight this. So Ahmedabad jumbo jet, 242 people. If you count 171,000, and I did that, so I've been preparing for this for some time, you're talking about 702 jumbo jets. Now, why do I bring this up? Even if one plane crashes, there is a full-blown inquiry. There's a report given to the government. There's such a hoo-ha, everything. So we need to tell ourselves we have 702 plane crashes happening, and these numbers are going up. They're not going down. They're going up, right? One more concept for you guys is the economic burden of suicide. And you can go back and look at the slides. Maybe over the next 2-3 days, as smaller groups are meeting, we'll bring this up again. Those of you who are from a public health background, you can take the lead on actually understanding the equations. But it's not just a cost to the family. In the case of student suicides, we talk a lot about impoverished families taking loans, sending them to coaching institutions. The student makes it to an IIT or a technical college or med school, goes through almost the whole program and dies. What a loss to the family. It's not a loss to the family alone. It's a loss to the whole country. And there is a way to quantify the loss to the country, okay? So what you look at here is if you're looking at, there are equations that have been developed in the United States, and if you look at the estimated economic burden, the term that we use is lost life years, which means what would this person have earned and contributed to society if they had lived a full life. And you can do that for every age group that you're looking at, right? So the estimate in Indian rupees for the 2022 statistics is 7.3 billion rupees. And if you start calculating this, I have another slide for students. I've done the same thing for them, and student suicide rates are going up. And these are highly educated, very bright students. Why are we saying that? Because we're only looking at data from colleges. The college-going population is the cream of the cream. We're not even measuring what's happening to students who are not making it to college. So even there, you have this number, 3.22 trillion, because their lifespans are longer. So their contributions to suicide, to society are much, much greater. Look at that number. I mean, we should use these concepts to wake up our lawmakers, our officials, our bureaucrats, right? My last thought, give me 2 more minutes. Yeah. is who should we focus on, right? That's the question. And I've been using all my examples for youth. But every one of you will decide who you want to focus on. Because we cannot say that because you're elderly, you can afford to die by suicide and we're going to focus on youth. No, every life matters, right? But for today's lecture, and this is my final points, I want us to focus on us. And I'll tell you why I want us to focus on us. We are all, in my mind, survivors of suicide loss. Okay, and I will leave you with a story. I won't show you all the other slides. I went to my first suicide prevention conference in 1999, so I have been around for a long time. And I walked into a hall that was this big. And on all the walls, there were these amazing quilts that had been hung up. And these quilts had these beautiful big portraits and images from the lives of people. Bright, smiling, everything. You know, each quilt for one person. And in that hallway, there was a woman sitting there in a wheelchair. She was elderly. And there was a man standing behind her. I walked in and I immediately started crying. I cried so much. So she called me, she says, "Come here, honey." And she hugged me and she said, "Are you a survivor of suicide loss?" I said to her, "I think I am, but not of my family." I'm crying because I don't see one Indian Asian face in this entire room, not one. She rocked me back and forth, and it was a turning point for me. And the message here is that when we ignore all of our loved ones that have died by suicide, we also ignore the lives that they lived before they died. Suicide is ultimately a choice that a person makes for whatever circumstance. The other thing that has shifted from the medical model is that we used to be trained to don't normalize suicidal thought. Don't normalize. Now, on the basis of the movement from people with lived experiences, and I believe this as a clinician, I believed it all the time. I never followed the edict of don't normalize suicidal thought. Because what I know from my upbringing in India and being very rooted in Indian culture is that anybody at any point can have a moment of despair and ask themselves, is life really worth living? And that is what we have to identify. But if we are being trained to say, don't ever bring up suicide, don't normalize it, your clients, your loved ones, your friends, your kids are never going to acknowledge to you that they're suicidal. Yeah? So we are all survivors of suicide loss because we've all been impacted by it. And the level of impact will be different based on how close you feel to the person that has died by suicide. Okay? And the closeness, the proximity, is not just physical or relational. It is actually emotional. So we have had a lot of celebrity suicides in India, and some of them have been it's debated whether one of them was even a suicide, but there was a huge hullabaloo, you know. What I was tracking, sitting in the US, was the aftermath of that event. I'm not taking any names. It doesn't matter, actually, because the same phenomenon happens in the US. But there was such a torrential response to that high-profile case. Most people didn't note that there were, within that year alone, there were at least 6 suicides in the same industry that this person was from. So we're talking about suicide contagion, we're talking about copycat suicide, we're talking about the impact of these kinds of deaths. So Julie Sorrell says, originally with the medical model, we used to be taught that every suicide has 6 survivors because that's your family. Julie Sorrell says, if you go community-wide, on an average, it's 135 survivors. Because we come from very close-knit communities, if we look at the 2022 statistics of 171,000 suicides, we have 23 million survivors in 1 year alone. Why am I saying that? If we let down our guard and we acknowledge that suicide is affecting all of us, we have an army in the making. If we all reach out to each other and clasp hands, there is nobody that can ignore that call to action. And that is what this is about, right? So I just want to acknowledge in my last 30 seconds, I didn't use a lot of the word compassionate. Sorry, Sandy, because that was the mandate. It has to be embedded with compassion. But I hope that the examples I've used show you that I was using an open mind, and I was being kind to myself and kind to the others that I was working with. And that's what compassion is all about, yeah? To create safety, and everybody else has talked about it, and we'll talk about it some more. So I'm not going to end, I'm not going to go through the end. We don't have any time, but a few questions? All right, so thank you very much. There are more slides in there, yeah. I think the lady in the corner raised her hand first, please. Yeah.
The flying kiss was first to this man sitting here. I love you, Aruna.
Thank you.
And this love you message is not just from me.
Thank you.
It's from my children. It's from my life.
Yeah.
You touched upon a point about, the cost to the family. The cost to the family, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't stop with the suicide. It carries on. Because the one who died has gone. That chapter is over. But he left behind responsibilities. My husband had died by suicide, right? He leaves behind aspirations, dreams, hopes, potential. And yesterday when Raj was giving his keynote speech, he talked about queer community, and I said, but what about me? What about my children? Because now I got married into a high society family. There they do not talk about suicide easily. And then the dreams, aspirations and hopes the children have inherited are coming from that ballpark figures of the environment, right? Now where do I go? What do I do with all those dreams, all those hopes? What do I do with them? So that cost now I have to cover because I'm the mother, I'm the nurturer. I'm not an ambitious mother, but I'm the nurturer. I can't see my children's dreams shattering because the man went away. So the cost is that cost, the post-suicide cost falls upon people like me to fulfill those dreams. And then the fight and the challenge is with the people who are not even willing to utter the word suicide. They call it the S word. Yesterday I was sharing that, it's like telling a prostitute after she has done 20 years of prostitution, prostitution is very bad. But that's my life. So what should I do? Not live? So please, if it is a fresh perspective, can we take a pledge and a vow that come what may, suicide to bolna hi padega, nahi to maro. पॉलिसी को, स्ट्रैटेजी को इम्प्लीमेंट करो, नहीं तो वेबसाइट से हटा दो. शोपीस नहीं चाहिए ना, ड्राइंग रूम में नहीं चाहिए शोपीस. Please, let's get real. And I just wanted to cover the point on the cost. The cost carries on. I'm paying the cost. Thank you. And I felt safe, so I shared. That's all.
Very good. I'll take some questions from the back, if it's okay. If there are any questions there. Oh, sorry. I said I'll take some questions from the back. Thank you for pointing that out. That's kindness, too. Please, sir, you're raising your hand. Would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dheeraj. I'm from Hyderabad. I'm a physiotherapist by profession, but I run a program, health promotion program for children between 8 to 12 years and live in a gated community, run a program called as Stay Active. It's a physical activity program. Many of the parents send to my program because they have some of the other behavioral issues. Yes. And unfortunately, in last 10 years, the place where I'm working, we have seen almost 5 suicides of different age groups. The recent one last month, 15-year-old jumped from the high-rise building. And what I've observed in 10 years, I lost my brother 20 years back due to suicide. And close to 5 members in my family within these 10, 20 years. And very close family members also who attempted suicide. And generally, it's a personal, professional, social, it's a topic which is interest to me personally, professionally, and socially as well. What we observe in our community, even as my personal practice also, I am missing that particular age group, which is the teenage age group. So students come to me from 8 to 12 and 13 years, but after 13, they drop down from the program. And it has been running since last 10 years, community-based health promotion program. So, and the other age group comes, that the parental age group, like 40s, and then I have senior citizens also. What language am I missing in my personal practice? Because we have seen that the youth has been away from all the community events. We have a lot of community events like festivals, celebrations, this program, that program. We have tried a couple of programs with Roshni also. And when the youth programs are conducted, we have a youth engagement program in the community. Set of parents, we all conduct regular activities, quiz and other programs. But this particular age group is always missing. And I liked when Anish in the online video said that we are not talking about their addiction behaviors. And there's a rampant addiction happening of weed and other substances in and around our community, inside and outside as well. We have written complaints to the police, but that's kind of neglected. I mean, they don't accept that this particular international school-going kids are not into the addictions and all, but it has been rampant. Yes. And my question is, what kind of communication? Because I'm from the health promotion background, which is part of public health, and I understand that behavior change communication, individual and social behavior change is very important. So at individual level, we are very successful. But what is at that community social change we are missing? The language, is it the language we are missing or what? I mean, my question is, why this particular age group is left out or missed out, or are we not able to communicate to them properly? Yeah. That is my question.
Thank you so much, Dheeraj, right? Is that you said your name? Yes. Yeah. Especially for acknowledging that you're from a public health communication background. One of the basic things that we have learned is that if you're trying to design a program for a particular group, get the input from that group first. So find youth leaders that represent the age group that you want, bring them in, and don't do it like a formal data collection. First, build the relationship, and then say, your opinion is really valuable to us. We sincerely accept whatever you tell us, and we would like to develop an outreach program for your peer group. Not only that, the strategy that I recommend, that very few people actually follow, believe it or not, is that ask them to bring 3 of their friends with them the next time they come. As if you want to incentivize it a little bit, do that. But what you're doing is trying your best to create a snowball. You know the snowball technique? You're trying to build a snowball. And that way, you are earning the trust of the families and the parents too, because what you're not recognizing in just designing theoretically based messages is that there are lots of barriers and lots of restrictions at different levels of a person's life. So spheres of influence. You're not accounting for all of them at all. And so that's why I think the public health approach was a good reminder to everybody that you have to test it at every phase and reiterate the testing also. Is this working? Is this working? Because as the young people will graduate and go on to college, you have to start with a new cohort. You can't use what worked for the last cohort, but you have a template that you can adapt very easily. So the first 2 or 3 generations of the work is hard work, and after that, the payoff starts to come. The second thing I want to say is that when you framed it as the parents are sending their kids to us, I have a big concern about that. The delegation of parental duties to everybody else is an issue that we really need to stop. It's like a leaking faucet, and we have to turn it off. So especially in gated communities and all, there's a natural structure for community building. What can we do to bring greater sense of responsibility in the parent group? Honestly, what you're describing is no different from what I'm seeing in the Indian community in the US, that the youth have started to say that the only thing the parents are doing is having parties and dressing up in beautiful saris and showing their jewelry, and it has nothing to do with us. Thank you for the smile. So I'm saying something right. There are hands in the back. We are short of time. I also want to acknowledge that we have taken over your break. Sandy is the main doer of this conference. Is it okay if we continue? Because it's not okay. We have to take just 1 or 2 questions and then stop. Please, there are people in the back. Thank you. I can talk to you separately. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, there is just one experience I want to bring here. So
we'll have to keep it brief because there are 2 panels after this.
Yeah, sure. So we have been working on first responders, and where we have been training social workers in specific communities, training them to be first responder. The challenge that we face when we want to see them implementing what they have learned, they want to do it for some time, but at most of the time, what the excuses they come with, it, they have their own set of duties, own set of responsibilities. They are not very serious about. So it is there, and we are doing all that we want to do, but somewhere in the daily life, it gets fizzled out. So that's another issue that we always face.
Can I just give a quick answer to that, and then we really have to put an end to the questions because of the next event. The approaches you use need to be different for the different settings. When you're talking about first responders, you're talking about a hierarchical institutional setting. For those types of settings, the programs that have been shown to work are the ones where you get the buy-in from the top. You cannot do it as a bottom-up approach. The bottom-up is good for community settings the way we are doing it here. If you do not have the buy-in of whoever the topmost people are, the first 2 or 3 levels of management.
It is done like that. So it is done with an organization where it is coming from top to bottom, that this is the program that you have to undergo and this is how you have to implement. But somewhere it fizzles out. Like when we want to follow up, say after 3 months, 4 months, they said, no, we are like busy with other stuff, or we have, because everyone is busy with their own daily livelihood. So
thank you for sharing. We can talk about it afterwards. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Here, there.
Yeah, you can sit here.